Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach. This will hopefully be a short one, but I wanted to record it because of my continual quest to try to make my recording a little better. I changed a couple things on my video display, made the fonts a tad bit larger. I also, for episode 534, I believe, I'm starting to upload a higher quality video so you can see it in 1440 if you want. That doesn't help in terms of the fonts being a little bit too small, but I'm still trying things. I'm still struggling a little bit with the mic and getting that to sound the way I want it to, but eventually I'll get there. I just want to be able to say record and not even think about it, and it's all going to sound well and look well, and everything will be fine. I was a little upset when I watched the playback of the episode that I did with the on.net video channel that's on YouTube from Microsoft. When I watched the playback, my screen looked not the greatest, and I wasn't happy with that. So hopefully I'll be addressing these things soon. But what I want to do is just spend a little bit of time talking about this, of course, new source generator project that I just created. And I did this because I got kind of inspired when I read some recent chatter for CSLA. If you don't know what CSLA is, it's a business object framework that's been around in .NET for quite a long time, and even before .NET. And it's written by my friend Rocky Latka. And it's something that I think actually, now that Blazor is a thing and you can have cross-platform front-end frameworks that are outside of a web application, you can use Avalonia or Uno or Maui or things like that. I think that was always the value add to me for CSLA, is to be able to have that be the definition of your domains, your domain objects. And I don't like using the word business because it feels very business and enterprisey. I'd actually like to just call them domain objects because that sounds more modern. I don't know. But in any event, when the only really last gasp of client-side development in the web for .NET way back in the day was Silverlight, and when that went away, it kind of lost its luster in a way, because it didn't give you the value of being able to do validation, both client side and server side, have those definitions be exactly the same and so on. But I think that's changing again. And so I will occasionally watch the CSLA Discord channel, and I don't use CSLA anymore, or at least should say I don't use it now, just because for what I do in my day job and what I do at night, it just doesn't come up anymore. But that doesn't mean I would never use it again. In fact, if needs must, or if it was the right fit for something, I would definitely consider it. But they were talking about the idea of using serialization, or using source generators for serialization. And this is something I brought up when source generators became a thing in C#, is to go, maybe having a source generator for CSLA could make the serialization process faster and consume less memory. And I had done some work years ago to make that serialization process a little bit better. Like, we got anywhere from 3 to 10% improvements in some areas. But I wanted to make a big jump forward and say, I think we can do better if we can serialize the paths, or not serialize the paths, but serialize what needs to be done on the paths. I'm not saying this right. I keep saying the wrong words. If we can generate the paths for serialization, that I think saves us some memory and increases time in terms of making it better. But I never did anything with it. And a couple weeks ago, this came up again, and I said, it just lit a fire under me. And I'm like, I want to try this again. I want to see if I can actually get this to work, because I actually never did anything with it. I just proposed it as an idea, and then I never tried it. Somebody tried to do it within CSLA, and it didn't, it just never got there. So I said, let's just do this outside of CSLA. And long story short, I now have a 0.10 version of this new serialization engine. And if you look at this test, what happens is we have a partial class here. So if I do have 12, good, that does show up. Okay, so here's the generated code. And what happens is that you now have your class derived from my custom interface. So I can set state and get state. Okay. CSLA has this concept of what's called a mobile formatter. And it's unfortunately a little bit intertwined with how CSLA works at a kind of deep level. It makes it harder to do pluggable serialization in CSLA. And it's not just mobile formatter, it's also some of the serialization info types. Some of these types are also somewhat specific to how mobile formatter works. And therefore it always kind of has a little bit of an advantage because it's baked in a little deeply. So there's some places where I have to do some reflection, but that it still is much better, or at least that's the initial results that I'm getting. So for example, if I say set state, so I need to deserialize an object, I will go through all the properties that I found, or what they're called managed backing fields in CSLA. I'll look for all those on the type, and I'll write those out. So in this case, you can see I get the int property, the string property, the child property. What I do is I realize that that's another business object in and of itself. And therefore, now I have to track whether it's going to be a duplicate reference or not. So I have that built in, that support. And if it is a duplicate, I put that in the stream and what the reference ID would be. Because when you read it back out, the first one will actually have to do the deserialization, but anyone after that, if it's a duplicate, will just reference that object. That's the way CSLA has always worked. Okay. If it's an actual value and it's not null, then I say I have a value, and then I tell it to go off and serialize its own state. Okay. Then there are some properties I need to save and also some fields I need to save for this particular business object. The reverse on the get just goes in the same order. So I get the order of these properties in exactly the same order for both. And then I read those out directly from the stream. This is different than what CSLA does right now because it has to know what the type is of the property that it's reading out. And so we'll put in an enumeration called CSLA known types. And so it always puts that before what the content actually is. I don't need to do that here. I know what it's going to be. So I can go get the int and the string and the actual business object and pull all that out of the stream. Down here, I have to do some, again, reflection things because I need to set these fields correctly. That's not ideal, but it works. So for what we have to do right now, I got this in the code that I'm generating. Okay, but that's all you have to do. You make your class partial. Right now in CSLA, you have to mark your types as serializable. This is something that Rocky's looking at removing because it really doesn't need to be there anymore. And in fact, this attribute is kind of going away in terms of its usefulness, if not already kind of useless. So what I might do is create my own attribute, and you would put that on your type. And that is also a way to signify, yes, this is a business type that I want to have serialization stuff generated for it, which is what you want to do with a source generator. If you can, target an attribute. Right now, I can just target this one. So it actually makes it easier for me to find the stuff. I would just then define my own attribute if this requirement goes away, which I think arguably it should. It should go away. Okay. So have a whole bunch of tests for a bunch of different stereotypes. That's what they're called in CSLA, the business base, business list base, read-only base, read-only list base, and then command base. There are a couple of other types where Rocky and I talked, and at least for now, I haven't included them because they're arguably for some older legacy scenarios, and they may not really have any value anymore in terms of what you do with modern .NET development. But I may add those in. Those are like the dynamic binding list-based stuff or things like that. But I have those core types in there, and I haven't done a ton of performance work, but I did do one, and I'm gonna want to do more. But I basically created a person here that has 3 properties, and I then said, okay, well, let's go through a round trip serialization. So I also do it so that it does it for my formatter and then also mobile formatter. This is a little bit of a pain because even if you set up a provider, a service provider, your IOC container, there's still mobile formatter shows up in a couple of different places. So I have to make sure that when I run my tests, that if I set one provider up for one and one provider up for the other, there's a property and application context. Actually, let me just show that here real quick. Application context, serialization formatter. That's actually a static property. That's a holdover from years and years gone by. And Rocky, he's changed CSLA to be more and more IOC friendly, is trying to remove these static members and these static things. This is one that still exists, and arguably it should go away and you shouldn't have a dependency on a static property. Okay, but that still is technically there. Okay. In any event, I think once I ensure that I can create 2 IOC containers, one that uses mobile formatter, the other one that uses mine, and then just say round trip it and get the results, then I can put in more of them. The one that I have done here, I don't have the results here. So hold on, let me go find them. Typically, I put these results in a results markdown file in a performance project that I have. I have them in the overview right now, but eventually when I get more of them, I'll put them all there. But as you can see with the mobile formatter for that simple business object, it takes almost 8 microseconds and 24 kilobytes of memory. With the generator formatter, it's only just under 3 microseconds and only just over 4 kilobytes of memory to do it. So if I do the math off the top of my head, this approach is 3 times faster and consumes about 6 times less memory. And it all stays in Gen 0. We never have a Gen 1 or Gen 2 collection going on. Now, of course, if there's more data, if the graphs are larger and stuff like that, we need to make sure that those tests are in there as well. But those are more that I'm going to be adding. So this was fun to do. Again, it's very specific to CSLA. So this isn't a generalized serialization framework, but it was fun to build and show that, yes, this does have some advantages. This has the benefit of making things quicker for you. And all you have to do, or at least the hope is that when you configure your app, you just make sure your formatter is my custom type. And then you would go into your types, make sure they're partial, which you'd find out rather quickly because the generator would be generating partial types and say, hey, your type is in partial. You need to make it partial. You also have to do this for everything in your graph. Not for like strings and stuff like that, but if you have any child business objects, you have to make sure that they are also generated because it assumes that everything down the line, like you saw here, for example, when it hits this property, it knows that it's a business object. And so it's going to essentially call set state on it as well. So if you don't have that with all of your business objects, then you're going to run into problems. You're not going to have a good time. I don't want to say it's an unfortunate aspect of this. It's just simply the way it is, that you have to have all of them built using this custom serialization engine. But again, the advantage of doing so is that you'll hopefully be quicker and consume less memory. I've also talked to Rocky about maybe potentially, and this is a longer view. If this pans out, we get more people to try testing this in their apps and seeing if they run into any issues and what they are and can I fix them. But to see if there's maybe a way to get CSLA to be like fully open in terms of configuring a serialization engine, and then also like moving some of those serialization info objects out in such a way so that they're not tied into the business objects themselves. Maybe not. Make this a little bit easier in terms of setting and getting some of that meta state, like is dirty, is new, and things like that. But maybe down the road that this becomes more of a standard. It's hard to say. Right now, I'm considering this to be experimental. It's just 010, and if it ever gets to complete 1.0 state, we'll see. But if you do use CSLA, give this a whirl. Just give it a try and see what you run into or what doesn't work. See if you get the feeling that it actually does make things a little bit quicker. That's hard to say. Like when we're talking microseconds, you're not going to notice that. But if you're doing large graphs over the wire, you may pick up a difference. So that's definitely possible. It also is just another illustration of using source generators to make things better for you. At least that's my belief. It doesn't mean that if you write something using a source generator, it's going to automatically better. You could make things far worse. That's completely true. But for a scenario like this, it does seem to have the potential of being a better way of doing things. And it's just fun to be able to build this kind of stuff and to see the results and have hard numbers to say, yeah, this does seem to have some promise. So in any event, wanted to show this and let people be aware of it. If you're interested, give it a whirl, and especially if you use this CSLA in your applications, and let me know if there's any problems. Just put an issue into the repository, and I'll be watching that. I'm probably going to go back to Rocks. I still need to release 8.10, and there's a couple things I want to do to it, but I might defer them to a future release because I want to get that open generics issue out and have that out there for people to use. So, but as I've always said, there's always a lot of things to talk about. Thank you for watching. Leave comments and questions below. See you in the next episode.